In today's world, anywhere you look, you'll find inequality. Elites who dine on endangered animals and avoid tax cuts while owning the GDP of a developing nation. Impoverished ghettos where people work two jobs and still have to sell drugs on the side to pay rent. The middle class, lower class, upper class, and of course the homeless. But where did all of this start? When did all of this start? And what did social classes look like in their infancy? Let's go back 1,225 years to medieval Europe in serfdom. Clearly defined social classes exist here by law. Serfs, 90% of the population who are owned by land and must work manual labor for their lords, cannot leave at their own will. Free peasants who can travel how they please, even haggle for prices, but still make a living with dirt under their nails harvesting crops. These would go on to make the lower classes of the future. The freemen, merchants, and artisans who lived in town and worked as tradesmen, performing skilled crafts and could legally own property. These would go on to make the middle class. And of course knights and warriors, who swore their allegiance to a king, a count, or duke and received land known as fiefs in exchange for military services. They lived nicer lives with better food, comforts, but they also took higher risk in protecting the assets of the wealthier. These would become the military, police, and secret service. Barons, counts, and dukes, though vastly different in social class, weren't all owners of large swaths of land. Dukes and counts more so. And that land that they owned had serfs or indentured servants legally bound by the land that they worked on. They made money off the work of others below them. They're like the modern equivalent of people who make money by having a big bank account with good interest rates, or large apartment complex CEOs who make money off of money. Essentially, they do very little themselves but lord over hundreds or thousands of others who work very hard to make a living. And then of course, the king. The king was appointed by literal God himself, chosen by God, by blood, and his specific lineage, and owned everything, including all of the counts, dukes, and any nobility, commoners, or peasants that lived or resided within his lands. They all paid their taxes to the king. This analogy, of course, in modern times, would be people such as Benjamin Netanyahu, Isaac Herzog, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Claudia Sheinbaum, Volodymyr Zelensky, and so on and so forth. Okay, great. We confirmed over 1,000 years ago social classes and inequality were ripe, ubiquitous, and mature in their development. But what about 5,000 years ago, 5 times the distance from now to the medieval period? Pharaohs, servants, military, slaves, temples, economies, and military campaigns. Right. Well, what about 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia in the Uruk period? NC, servants, military, slaves, temples, economies, and military campaigns. Great. That's essentially the limit of written history as we know it. It appears that social classes existed and were well developed even when the first symbol was written in cuneiform. The origin of social classes goes back much further than any written description of it, and hence class inequality is prehistoric. We need to go into the deep past, before the Bronze Age or even Copper Age, so deep that people hadn't mastered metallurgy and sharp stones dominated. Enter the Neolithic, the era of not moving around, 9,000 years ago. For those who don't know, in the Paleolithic and Mesolithic we moved around for our food based on seasons and wildlife. In the Neolithic we grew most of what we ate. And that means that people and animals wanted to kill us for said food. So we built walls around our food, and then built our houses around the food within those walls so we could control the food. That meant we needed armies to protect the crop, which meant someone needed to decide which villages to friend and which to invade. And when not everybody needed to focus on producing food, some people could specialize into making medicine, and some could train for combat, make tools, keep track of how much grain each person gets, and how much the leader gets. Now, a medium is needed to measure value without rotting or decaying as food does, such as shells, beads, or tokens that ultimately lead to social classes. Then, once we found out that nothing could get in and nothing could get out of our walls, we began bringing animals in, and they began to eat the indigestible stalks of our grains and create milk, cheese, meat, and eggs. Now people don't need to leave their settlement to get protein, carbs, or fat. This meant some people work less and others work more. Some stay inside and eat butter, ox backstrap, and drink fermented grain water, while others work the edges of town, growing grain and eating the coarser bread. Then, because People didn't need to migrate around, exploring caves, steppes, and the bush. Cave lion, bear, and hyena deaths dropped in number. Injuries and freezing to death decreased, and starvation went from seasonal to less than every year. Birth rates exploded, and when you have more people, some people begin to not know their neighbor. So physical identification means everything in society. Shell necklaces and token currency, head garments, finer dyes and face paints. Bigger houses and private guards all to protect your bead and shell hoard. More important than your neighbor mistaking you for a commoner, though, was the hundreds of other Neolithic settlements also doing this whole agriculture thing. War, looting, negotiations, treaties, protection, religious conversion, spiritual leaders, kings, knights, peasants, nobles, and medicine men. What does it all mean? Social class is a social distinction. What percentage of wealth does a person own? What is someone's net worth 20,000 years ago? The more things society has, the more a person can have. In the Paleolithic, being bigger and stronger meant more muscle, which meant more logs, which meant more fire and in turn a warmer cave. More successful hunts, less challengers in the forms of other men. A warmer cave meant more women, more meat, more fat, more skins and furs, and better tools were entrusted to the best hunter, higher decision-making power to lead his own tribe. In chimpanzee society, we see these social classes as well. Social classes have existed before man was man, and they always will. As long as humans can distinguish ourselves from our fellow man, we will always find ways to elevate ourselves above each other.